Good afternoon. I'm Stacy Hurst. I'm Director of the Department of Arkansas Heritage, and it's been a busy morning in state government, so I'm very excited to be here. I have the privilege of serving as your moderator today, which is a great privilege for me, and I appreciate very much this opportunity. So even before I became the SHPO, as it's called, the State Historic Preservation Officer, I've enjoyed a lifelong love of historic buildings and architecture. My husband and I, Howard Hurst, have redone 2 old houses, and we currently live in a 1939 house designed by Little Rock architect Max Mayer. Our first house was also designed by Max Mayer. I led the Junior League of Little Rock's campaign to buy and restore the old Woman's City Club in downtown Little Rock. And as a city council member in Little Rock, I've seen firsthand the benefit that can be gained by revitalizing historic properties and districts. Now, in my role as Director of the Department of Arkansas Heritage, I see over and over our many programs, including, I see Greg here, Main Street, and Susan Scott Kaufman with our Historic Preservation Program. The benefits of the National Historic Register, the benefits of our Historic Tax Credit Program, et cetera, et cetera. The power of historic preservation is real. Tom Mays, who is Vice President and Senior Counsel for the National Trust for Historic Preservation, recently released a book. It's called Why Old Places Matter. It's a compilation of essays written for a forum that was hosted by the National Trust. The original purpose of the essays was to give people the words and phrases to express why the old places of their lives matter. Mays talked with hundreds of people in composing the essays about why old places matter, and through this work, he drew several important conclusions. And I'll let you read about all of those if you pick up his book, but I'll share one of them. He noted that preservation, or the stability of place, is more important to people than he originally thought. I'm quoting him now. He said, "Preservation, which fosters stability, is not simply something nice to do. It's vital. It gives people a sense of continuity and belonging in an ever-changing world. It is essential to the way people orient themselves to the world." So we all know in our heart and in our soul that historic preservation is important. We know it's why people travel thousands of miles and spend thousands of dollars to see old places and old things, why millennials report preferring historic districts to malls. Historic structures make a community interesting and unique. So today we'll talk about some benefits, some real-world examples, and some tools of historic preservation. I have the privilege of introducing our panel. First, I would like to introduce Chad Young. Chad is Vice President and Director of Design with WD&D Architects in Little Rock. He's been an architect. You've been with him since 2002 and served as Director of Design for the firm. He has been with WD&D since 1995, having served as a project manager and designer on numerous projects, focusing on corporate, financial, institutional, residential, educational, and municipal projects. I think that about covers them. You focus on everything. Prior to his employment with WD&D, he studied architecture at the University of Arkansas and spent 3 years of summer internship with the Donaghy Project for Urban Studies and Design. Chad has focused his practice on urban planning and design of the built environment. Chad has earned WD&D many design awards with his remarkable architectural designs, including 7 design awards for the renovation and addition of Mid-America Science Museum in Hot Springs. He has a recent AIA award for the ATA International, the world headquarters in Little Rock. and various design awards for work on projects such as First Arkansas Bank and Trust, Crown Plaza Hotel, Metropolitan National Bank, and Cruz and Associates offices. Along with his design success, Chad is an active member in the community supporting state and local organizations. He actively serves on the Downtown Little Rock Partnership Board, the Little Rock Air Force Base, Community Council Board, the Cabot Panther Foundation Board, the Jacksonville Rotary, the University of Arkansas Fay Jones School of Architecture Dean Circle. He is also an active member of the Arkansas chapter of the American Institute of Architects as a licensed architect. Chad and his wife Shanna have 3 children, Eden, Grayson, and Stratton. They live in Cabot. He enjoys coaching the kids' team sports, painting custom artwork, and designing custom houses, along with spending time with his family. Chad, I'm going to turn over this discussion to you.
Thank you, Stacy. And in my spare time, I get to do architecture. So, no, appreciate you guys letting us talk about architecture and the importance of preservation. Our firm's about to embark on 100 years this next year, so we've had some, many successful landmark projects over the years. Some of our projects we come back to and get to renovate after being around that long. I'm going to talk about 2 projects that we think are good case studies for preservation and for revitalization of our communities. The first one is going to be James Mitchell School, and I'll dive into the slideshow. I've got a few slides to go through here, so hang on. The James Mitchell School is a project we just finished up just this past August. It's the current home of Scholar-Made Achievement Place. That's a K through 9 charter school, public enrollment charter school. It was founded by Dr. Phyllis Anderson. It just opened up just in August. It just was finished by Clark Construction, who was the contractor, the CM on the project. This is what the building looked like when we arrived. It was basically surrounded by concrete. It had a leaky roof. The inside, the interior was just totally decaying and rotting. It's there down on Roosevelt and Battery Street. It's about 42,000 square feet of space, boarded up and vacant. It's just south of the Central High Historic District on 2410 South Battery Street, surrounded by houses. I mean, there's a plethora of houses all the way around it. This is a map of 1908. It's in the bottom left-hand corner. This was the West Little Rock of Little Rock back in the day. It was a growing middle class in West Little Rock, or in Little Rock at the time. The families were building houses quite a bit up and down these boulevards here. There's one really interesting terrace called the Bowman Addition that is just south of Children's Hospital, where there's a widened median and a greenway. It's a really interesting area. So this was a thriving location for the middle class. The building was designed by architect Charles Thompson and Thomas Harding. Thomas Harding did the additions to it. It was done in an American schoolhouse style and added on to in a neoclassical style. It was added onto 3 times. There was so much growth in this area that it was not, within a couple of years it was added onto. So there's 1908 was the original building, and then 1910 and then 1915 were the 3 additions, just because it was at capacity every time they'd get done with an addition. It was named after James Mitchell. James Mitchell was the president and the editor-in-chief of the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. He was a strong proponent for teacher salaries and equal pay. This is a picture of the building there on Main Street. It's a neoclassical revival school. The front facade, the 1915 version, this is the main entrance that you see when you approach the school on the front facade. It was done in neoclassical and was one of the best examples of classical revival in Little Rock. This front facade actually cost, back then, $21,470 for this whole front addition. That's the building when we first started the project. It was boarded up, full of bats and mold and dilapidated interiors. After we got done with it, we restored it to the historic preservation standards. It is on the National Register. We replaced the windows to match the 1908 original windows, retuck pointed terracotta, a new roof, and a complete gut on the inside as well. So walking around the building, this is the side on the east that you can kind of tell the different phases of the design. The center portion is the original 1908. The one on the left is the 1910. The one on the right is the 1915 neoclassical one I was talking about earlier. The last edition was a 1952 edition done in an international style. This was the cafeteria, and there's about 3 more classrooms above it. This was also the loading dock area. We thought this would make a great main entrance on the side for drop-offs. So basically we tied all 3 buildings together with a glass link that tied the 2 later buildings that are to the left with the main historical building, and became one of the main entrances and drop-offs for the school. This is inside the loading area, and that's that link that ties all the buildings together. The cafeteria, the old kitchen into a classroom. This is down the basement. This is now one of the teacher workrooms. This is kind of a dark slide, but basically it was hard to get around inside before we did anything. But it had press tin ceilings that we recreated. It was actually the original press tin manufacturer was W.F. Norman, and they still make the same press tin stamp and actually utilize that same ceiling. So it was kind of neat to go back to the same manufacturer more than 100 years later. So that's the main grand hall. This is the main historical lobby. When you first come in, the historical doors on the left-hand side. The stairways, we had to bring those up to code and make those more accessible and safe. As you can see, everywhere there was brick, that was a major water leak at the roof. You can see the stucco and the plaster coming off of the walls. It's one of our favorite details. But the building is full of natural light. It's just the interiors are just amazing. This was on the upper floor next to that tree. The ceiling had collapsed. The floors were totally buckled and just full of water. It was unsafe to walk in many of the locations throughout the school. As you would walk, your foot would just sink into the wood floor. But this is that room now. Their main hall, which is one of their breakout areas and kind of outside the classroom lecture areas. And their student commons, which is a place where they'll have their books and library and places they can work on their laptops. Typical classrooms include a smartboard and modular furniture for basically collaborating. This slide here, you can't see it, but this was one of the rooms that was full of bats and bat droppings. It was pretty gross. So, what's been the impact? This has been a school that's been boarded up since 2004. Little Rock School District basically abandoned the building in 2004. It's been sitting basically vacant. We worked about a year ago on getting the status for the charter school to open up. It's now a neighborhood school. It's doing exactly what it was always meant to be, a neighborhood school. Dr. Anderson's really excited now that the kids can walk to school from the neighborhood, so that she's seeing the fruit of that labor. The school kids come out on the front steps and have their town hall meetings every day, and come out on nice days. And they said that there's lots of neighbors that come out and watch the kids and participate in what's going on. This is a view aerial as well that you can see where the drop-off is on the west side of the building. One of the things we were trying to keep in mind was the fact that charter schools have probably a little more traffic. So we got a lot of off-street drop-off areas, and has minimized any traffic concerns, and they've been a good neighbor so far. The other project I'm going to talk about is the Little Rock Tech Park. This one just finished up about a year ago, and is there on Main Street. This is in contrast to more of an urban type of renovation project. In the heart of downtown, at the corner of Main and Capitol Avenue. Tech Park, you can see, is down to the right-hand side. You're looking at toward the back of it, but you can kind of see the Capitol off in the view. This is more of an urban redevelopment project. The Tech Park is basically a incubator for technology startups. It is a hotel for technology businesses that want to start a new business. and to collaborate with other people who are starting a new technology-based business. Right in the center of the creative corridor on Main Street, the Tech Park is situated basically where the center of Little Rock is and used to be. These are some old photos of what Main Street looked like years ago, 1950s. You can see just is the center of commerce. A lot of parades up and down Main. The old 415 Main is right in the background there. That's the corner building that makes up the Tech Park campus. That's the Exchange Bank. It is on the historic register. You can see it was a drugstore in the bottom of it. This is a night shot in 1956 looking down Main Street to the south. Center Theater is on the left-hand side, and the block of Tech Park is basically that whole block there on the left-hand side. Lots of storefronts lit up at night, a lot of traffic and activity in cars. So this was the first phase of Tech Park. The two buildings on the left-hand side make up about 42,000 square feet. Those were 1920s buildings. They're both concrete. Well, it's concrete structure on the one in the middle. The one on the left-hand side is a wood-framed one. I mentioned the Exchange Bank is on the right-hand side. It was designed by Charles Thompson. Again, Charles Thompson being Dan's predecessor. These buildings here, combined with the Pew building, these are drawings of the Pew building, make up both two 6-story buildings, and they both none of the floors line up, so you basically have two 12-stop elevators in both these buildings. Our firm was selected in 2012 to master plan the Tech Park campus, to basically look at the entire block and a half of what the future growth could look like to expand. Tech Park is already starting their second phase of growth, which is going to infill where the old Center Theater used to be. We also did the phase 1, which is the renovation of the 42,000 square feet of the two buildings I pointed out earlier, the two on the left. So that's the result of Tech Park's renovation. We tried to be true to the character of the buildings, maintaining the exterior integrity, but really trying to give some new life and new energy to the lower floors. And now this part of Main Street is starting to light up. There's a little retail coffee shop on the lower level. There's a large meeting room there on the left-hand side in 415. Some of the before-afters, looking back towards that meeting room with the new canopy over, looking into now this was the main entrance area in 417. This was what it looked like before. This was going to become the new front door of the Tech Park. So this is what we created to make it a coffee shop, a new front entrance. And the whole premise on the Tech Park is that they want these technology companies not only to interact and collaborate amongst themselves, but they want some real energy, basically from people outside, coming in and seeing what's going on, seeing some of the programs going on with the Tech Park, and really create some new life on Main Street. Looking back towards the Main Street. And this is the meeting room that has the large graphic wall. It's their meeting spot for their board. And some of the upper floors that have basically renovation, open office areas. The key to the Tech Park was to keep it flexible. I mean, the technology, as you know, is changing. It is always evolving and growing and changing. And so we wanted to make sure that they could adapt and change with the change in technology as well. This is one of the floors that the Stevens were located on. This used to be the home of Stevens Inc. back in the 80s, before they moved into the old Dole Rogers building and become the Stevens building. Mr. Stevens used to sit in that back left-hand corner of this floor here. And now the whole thing centers around these conference rooms. We talked about collaboration, spaces that these technology companies can come together and talk about their new ideas, collaborate about something that somebody else is doing. Oh, I didn't know you did that. Hey, I'm doing this new product. But, maybe our programs could work together. So there's a lot of that going on in the Tech Park. It's been widely successful. All 51 offices are full right now, according to Brent Birch, the executive director of the Tech Park. So he is out of space, except for some of the open office areas in the middle. They're starting to get their FinTech is moving up to or Accelerator is moving up to the first floor, or sixth floor from the first floor. But other than that, they are full. This is one of the views from the upper level mezzanine looking down into the coffee bar area. And just to see the light and the activity and the people working and moving and having people coming in and out. I think it's really been a great thing for Main Street. Brent shared with me that Samantha's came to Main Street because they knew that Tech Park was going to locate there. So there's some, basically domino effect that we're starting to see. Hopefully we'll see more on Main Street as well as around Mitchell School as development happens. As we know, architecture has the power to transform buildings and transform neighborhoods and streets. And so we think there's a powerful case for revitalization and preservation. So I'm going to turn it over to the next moderator.
All right, Dan, let me say a few words about you first. I want to introduce Dan Fowler. Thank you so much, and we're going to have time for questions at the end. Dan Fowler is our next speaker. He is an accomplished design architect and master planner with a personal interest in urban and campus projects. He has been actively involved in numerous urban projects and is heavily involved in the redevelopment and preservation of historic downtown areas in Arkansas. Dan is the lead architect and developer for the Paint Factory, a mixed-use development that will be home to Cromwell's new headquarters. Already is, right? Yeah. As a retail space, loft apartments, and a restaurant. The project is part of a larger revitalization of East Village, a historic industrial neighborhood in downtown Little Rock. Dan joined Cromwell Architects Engineers as an intern at 19 years old and now holds the position of Chief Operating Officer, managing financial and business operations of the company. During his tenure at Cromwell, he has instituted various programs and initiatives that strengthen the balance between design, project management, and business management, providing a symmetry that is so integral to a building services company. He is a graduate of Leadership Greater Little Rock and Leadership Arkansas and received his Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Arkansas in 1997. Dan Fowler.
Thank you, Stacy. I didn't realize my intro had so much about the project. I can skip most of my presentation now, right? Okay, I'll cede my time to Patricia, right?
Elaborate.
That's right, okay. Well, I'm going to have a little bit of a different presentation than Chad. I'm going to start with a project which, as Stacy said, is very near and dear to Cromwell and to my company. That's a new headquarters for us in East Little Rock. But I'm also going to talk some about work that's been done in this area in East Village, and how our project and the efforts that we're doing really relates to the revitalization of entire area. So, our story really starts, I guess, back in 2015 is all I really have time to cover. Our former location was at the corner of Markham and Spring Streets in the Convention District here in downtown. And in 2015, we had some opportunities to sell our building. And this really was a surprise to us. We didn't really know what we were going to do with it, didn't know how to respond to it. But in working with my partners, we decided we were going to take the leap and take the plunge and do this. We'd been there for 40 years. This was a generational opportunity to actually sell this building and go do something big and significant and transformative. So we did it. But we didn't do it lightly. We really knew that there were a few things that we wanted to achieve with this move, wherever it was. So we wanted to make sure we stayed downtown. We'd been a downtown resident, our company had, for 130 years, and we had no intention of leaving downtown. We want to make sure that what we did was able to transform our practice and our culture, especially as it relates to collaboration amongst our teams. We also wanted to express a little bit more about who we are as a company today. A 40-year-old building wasn't necessarily doing that for us. And then we wanted to create a rich environment for our people, one in which that was intellectually and emotionally stimulating for our current teams as well as a recruiting tool for future teams. And then ultimately, we wanted to make sure that this investment that we were making somewhere in downtown was going to have a positive impact on downtown and not just be an island in the middle of an area. So we started our search, enlisted the help of some really great partners in Moses Tucker. And I do have to say, they've been with us all along the way, start to finish on this project, continue to help us with new developments happening. We looked west, north, south. We looked at the Tech Park area, and ultimately landed on East Little Rock as a really great potential. This building in particular that you see on the screen, this is the former home of Sterling Paint, before that Stebbins and Roberts. And at its heyday, it really was a sprawling operation where they took raw materials in, they mixed the paints, they put it in a can, they printed their own labels, they put it on pallets and shipped it all across the country. Really a great Arkansas success story. If you have a minute, you ought to look it up. It really is pretty fascinating. And we really fell in love with the building, in particular the old warehouse and distribution center that you see on the right. Contributing to that really was a feel and understanding what was happening in the area. Again, we didn't want to be on an island, so we really took a pretty critical look at the neighborhood and realized that it was amazing. Or maybe we could see amazing is a better way to put it. It had some great anchors. We're sitting in one of them. Heifer was not too far away, and the blue bar on the screen is actually the property and redevelopment that we're doing, and if you had a strong arm, you could probably hit it with a rock from here. So we knew we had some great neighbors, but we also knew there were some surrounding neighborhoods, real neighborhoods, that had a lot of great potential, and that's in East Little Rock and Hanger Hill. And so, this is really what made us fall in love with the piece of property and the idea of East Village. So this is the building as we found it. It was, they ceased operations here in this facility around 2000 and essentially mothballed. It was used for light storage, things like that. But it was, it was in pretty tough condition. You can see the bottom left-hand corner, the condition of the exterior was really pretty rough, but it had some real beauty to it. These amazing steel windows, amazing concrete structure, concrete floors, really were pretty inspiring to us and pretty beautiful to us. Beautiful enough for us to commission a photographer to come in and take some really amazing shots of it, artistic shots in their own right. Also found some really great artifacts. The top left is a pallet scale that really is beautiful and has been worked into some of the space that's part of the project. So this is an aerial that I think can give you a pretty good view of the scale of this building and the scale of the property. So the property goes all the way up almost to the horizon on the top right, and that's a parking lot now for us. One of the keys for us was the fact that the building is 2 stories, and that was really critical because we wanted to do something that was really a community on our property. And the 2 stories allowed density and mix of uses to really be able to do that, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But ultimately the program was simple. We needed a headquarters. We wanted to do something that fostered community. We wanted a mix of uses, and we wanted to improve the area. Part of our work was to have the building listed on the National Register, and we did that. It's designed by Ray Burks, who also designed the original Fine Arts building in MacArthur Park and the original stands for War Memorial Stadium, pretty well-known architect locally. So here's some images of the finished product. What we really tried to achieve here was a great deal of respect for the fabric that was left behind. Exposing the concrete and that amazing structure. We've exposed all the plumbing piping and really embraced that. The old steel windows have all been restored and retained. Even when we injected new materials, we tried to do it in a way which is fairly industrial feeling, so that the sense of the place and the history of the place still lives as you walk through the office. These are more shots of our studio. A big part of what we were interested in doing was creating collaborative space. As I mentioned, culture change for us was important. So we dedicated over 20% of our studio space to non-assigned, casual, collaborative space. It's a mouthful, but it's very important for us. So there's a variety of spaces down the center of the studio that are day-lit by these new skylights right down the center of the space, bringing amazing light. They also generate power, the first solar panel skylights of their kind in Arkansas. But it provides an array of really different casual interaction spaces, which was critical to us for the move. The exterior we did a great deal of work on. It's a very simple, understated building. As you could imagine, it was a warehouse when it was built. Business office, so it had a little bit of detail and ornament, but not a great deal of it. And so we tried to respect that pretty dramatically and keep it understated. And the Park Service, to keep it listed, we actually had to comply with that as well. But we had the freedom to layer on some interest and some vitality. And so we did that with a couple of things. Some really great dramatic signage. If you haven't been down here at night, it's all lit up in neon, which was important to us to really have some drama in the area. We also have a pretty extensive streetscape. We've added, 60 or so on-street parking spaces, street trees, branded banners, light poles, and we've even gone as far as to do some public art in the area in a mural, which really is intended to be a little bit of a surprise for folks. If you approach from a non-traditional direction, which is from the east, from the airport, you happen upon this mural which faces east, we think is really pretty dramatic. A big part of what we wanted to achieve was a mix of uses. We think that's important for the richness of experience and community. These are some images of the restaurant, which is really fantastic. If you haven't been there, it's called Cathead's Diner. I'd urge you to go. It's really terrific. Donnie Furneaux and Kelly Marks are the operators of that, and you can see the scale there in the top right-hand corner. That's an example of what we really try to do, keeping as much of that fabric as we could with the building. We also have an event space we use during the day, but at lunchtime and after hours, it's available for rent. And we also will donate the time in the space to community causes, volunteer groups, such as neighborhood associations. We have some alternative education groups that meet there. And it's really a space that encourages the interaction and exchange of ideas, and also draws a lot of people to the area. Foot traffic is important, visibility in the neighborhood is very important. No community would be complete without some people living here. So we have apartments, very simple 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. There's 16 of them. And here we had a little more freedom even to do some things that honor the building. So we were able to retain the old masonry exterior walls and expose those. The concrete floors are beautiful, complete with old palette markings, spray painted palette markings. And down the corridor in the skylighted area, we've created some graphics which are more photographs from when we found the building. So you see in the foreground, that's some old sterling paint cans on a pallet, and we've got 6 of those, which really are terrific. Okay, so I think one of the not least important aspects of our work really was, or goal of our project was to do something important in the community, something positive. And in looking early on at this project, we did know that there were some amazing places that had been forgotten and had lost their kind of vibrancy really right around us. And we really hope and continue to hope that our work will be a catalyst for revitalization of the 2 neighborhoods, south and east of our project. They're home to some really amazing architectural resources, some historic churches, which are pretty important in the community. The Woodruff House, which is just not too far away from our project, is probably one of the most endangered historic resources we have in Central Arkansas. And I know Patricia's group has been working hard to find someone who will restore that and care for it the way that it deserves. There's a really great old fire station down on 6th Street that legend has it that Brooks Robinson played as a kid, while his father was a fireman in the area. All that really goes together to create a collective sort of memory, an institutional memory of a great part of our city and a great time in our city's history. And so we're working very hard to make sure that continues on, and that our investment really is ensured to improve these neighborhoods. So we didn't do this alone, and we didn't start this even. We've got some great pioneers in the neighborhood. Like I said, we're sitting in one of them today. The Clinton Library was a major instigator of revitalization of this area. Heifer International was a big part of it too. But most recently, we've seen the growth of some retail and some food and beverage operations, which prove that people are willing to come to East Little Rock. for fun, for food and drink, and that it wasn't a scary place. And it might be a little edgy, but that's part of the experience, and it's part of going to an old warehouse district. As planners and architects, we really just couldn't keep ourselves from developing a plan. This is an early plan that we worked out with Jimmy and his team, Jimmy Moses and his team, that really is just an expression of some potential, some things that were happening in the neighborhood, drawing them on a map, and then filling in the blanks. And this is by no means is what's happening in East Village, but I think is an expression of the discipline and the long-term vision that we all have for the development of East Village and what it could be like. Part of that is helping to define what the quality of the environment is, the spaces between the buildings, and what the streetscape could be like. And probably the most unexpected piece of this, and maybe the funnest piece for me, frankly, is we're promoters, and we give this area visibility in a way that I think it demands. This area demands, and success of the area is going to require. So, we host parties in the area. There's an alley party that happened last year that actually has become a business now. We've had a social media presence. We've branded East Village. We have food trucks come in 2 or 3 times a week now to draw people into the neighborhood, to give it visibility. And in lots of cases, we advocate for the neighborhood as our new home. There's lots of infrastructure issues in the area, maybe the nicest way to put it. And we advocate for the solution of those with city leaders as well as people that live in the neighborhood and with county and state officials. We raise visibility and help define solutions to create a better place. We also volunteer a lot of time, and a lot of it's fun, a lot of it's hard work. Sometimes we paint houses for elderly in the neighborhood. The public art program, we didn't start, but we think it's really amazing. We've got some really cool volunteer public art you can find around under bridges and such. But it really has inspired a lot of art in the area, and those have become a really big piece of the fabric of the neighborhood. People stop and pose at the various murals that are around. And sometimes we even try to design buildings just to attract people to the neighborhood. So the bottom right-hand corner is an example of something we did to try to attract the symphony into East Village. That's a view of the former home of Rocktown Distillery. And I have to say this was not successful, but I think is indicative of some of the work that we try to do, use our skills and talents the best way we can to try to attract people to join us into the neighborhood. Lots of recent successes that we're proud of, and some of these were happening already when we started our project, but East M has just recently opened. It's amazing seeing kids on the sidewalk running around. It's weird this week because they're not in school, so it's kind of odd, but we love the traffic, we love the people, we love the vibrancy that having kids and parents on the street that brings. It's a great marina under construction not far from here that's just east of the library that I think will be complete probably next year with a future phase of residential. There have been some announcements about apartments and hotels on the western edge of East Village, right up against the interstate and the I-30 corridor. Those are all in various stages of development, but those really are, I think, indicative of the success that we've had of raising visibility and being a pioneer and showing that it's possible and that it can be done. And then some solid announcements. You've probably seen these, but I want to say them again, show them again. The Rail Yard is a really cool urban food truck, beer garden, barbecue joint combination that will be on 6th Street right at the Western Railroad Bridge. That's probably the best description I've got. 1212 East 6th. That's set to open, I think, in 2 or 3 weeks' time. And we've recently announced the redevelopment of the old Rocktown Distillery. We're calling it simply the Distillery, and it'll be home to a dental practice management group, AXPM, and also home to a light food and beverage retail, possibly coffee shop that'll front right on Shell Street. So lots of fun things happening for sure. In closing, I guess I want to recognize a couple things. Ultimately, our goal is to become another great downtown neighborhood. And we've got some great examples here. We've got the River Market, we've got Soma, we've got Argenta, We've got the tech park area. Every one of these places is really built on the uniqueness of the place that is there. It's built on the backdrop of historic buildings and on the backdrop of what has happened there historically. And so we're putting a great deal of emphasis on the same sort of thing for East Village, and ultimately we hope that one of these days we'll join that list as a great downtown neighborhood.
Thank you, Dan. Our third panelist is Patricia Blick, who is Executive Director of the Quapaw Quarter Association. Patricia took this position at the end of January of 2017. Before taking the post with QQA, she served as Deputy Director and the Certified Local Government Coordinator of the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, an agency of the Department of Arkansas Heritage. Prior to her move to Arkansas in 2010, she was the Chief of Historic Preservation for the City of Annapolis, Maryland. Patricia has held historic preservation positions at the federal, state, and local levels, including time with the United States Army Ordnance Center and School, the White House Historical Association, the Maryland Historical Trust, and Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington. Patricia holds a master's degree in American Studies with a concentration in historic preservation from the George Washington University in D.C. and a bachelor's degree in economics from James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. She is the chair for the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. She has served as the NAPC chair-elect and secretary of the board. She is married to David Blick, and they have one daughter, Annie. Patricia.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon with my counterparts. In some way, I'm connected to them geographically, and I'm glad that we had these case studies to talk about. The Quapaw Quarter Association is 50 years old this year, so we're celebrating a big milestone as well. And we held our spring tour of homes this year in the Central High Neighborhood Historic District, and it was immediately adjacent to the Mitchell School, so we were beyond thrilled to see that building under rehabilitation. And as I think folks know, if they follow Preserve Arkansas, we nominated schools that were recently closed in historic neighborhoods for the most endangered list, because we feel that neighborhood schools are anchors, and they're a very important component of a vital neighborhood. So we're very excited that building, it's obviously a beautiful building, has been restored and is back in use. And I have been over there to see it. I haven't been inside, but the exterior is wonderful. And then, of course, as Dan mentioned, the Quapaw Quarter Association acquired the Woodruff House, the William Woodruff House in East Village at the end of 2014 with the assistance of the City of Little Rock and actually also the Department of Arkansas Heritage. And at that time, it was quite literally a save. It was a building that was most definitely very endangered, and I would suggest on the cusp of being something that could have been condemned and demolished. And so the building right now is not back in use, but I would say, let's say it's not endangered anymore. Let's say it's stabilized, it's mothballed, and it's looking for someone to redevelop it. And I think for us, it's just serendipitous that the activity that's taking place in East Village is making our property even more attractive. And so we have high hopes for that site. And as Dan pointed out, it's also a nice link between the development at East Village and historic Hanger Hill, which is a wonderful residential area that it's also listed on the National Register, and I would say ripe for rehabilitation and development where they have infill lots that are vacant. So I feel connected to these two gentlemen right here and the projects that they've worked on, so I feel like it's a nice fit. One of the things that they didn't talk about, except just in passing, was the advantages that you have of rehabilitating historic properties, and so really that's where I'm going to fit into this conversation. Besides the fact that preservation has evolved since the time of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, saving Mount Vernon was really considered by many the first historic preservation, restoration, or save in history, and that was in the 1850s. So we've gone from an ethic of saving important houses that belong to important people or are architecturally interesting to really looking more at neighborhood revitalization. And when you look at the federal programs that came about in the 1960s is when the National Historic Preservation Act was passed. But you're looking at the response that people had to actually other federal programs, major highway projects, urban renewal projects, and at that time, people recognized it was going to damage or destroy neighborhoods. So I mean, yes, specific houses or buildings might have been vulnerable, but it was also losing a neighborhood and a sense of place. And Quapaw Quarter Association, in the same vein, has evolved too to advocate for preservation of neighborhoods. And we're not talking specifically about residential neighborhoods, but we're also talking about commercial districts because, of course, historically, residential and commercial were all in one place. You know, mixed use is not a new thing. I mean, really, that's where we started, people living above their storefronts. So everything old is new again, right? So we are very much advocates for preservation of neighborhoods, historic areas, a broader save than just a specific building, even though I would say the Woodruff House is sort of special, but it just needed immediate intervention because it was so vulnerable. Let me move on here. So again, I was brought in to talk about what opportunities you have as you are considering or contemplating rehabilitation of historic properties or looking in areas where there are historic districts, National Register listed properties in particular. And we talk about really needing a partnership. It is not something that can necessarily solely be taken on by the government. It's not something that can necessarily be taken on solely by private interests. It's really something that has to have both parties working together to make these projects a reality. And we see that everybody benefits when you have these public-private partnerships. Investments in areas where you have existing infrastructure. That is vitally important. The farther out we move from the city centers, the more services we have to supply. And frankly, we're not big on levying impact fees when we have new development and new subdivisions. So limited resources have to be spread farther afield. So if you work in areas where the existing infrastructure is, that saves money, and you can concentrate an area. I'm not saying that infrastructure doesn't have to be updated, because it very often does, but the investment is not going to be as high as if you're moving farther afield from the city centers or where you have existing infrastructure. People who work on historic buildings are often local contractors, so you're supporting your local economy. They are good paying jobs. If you've ever had any work done on your house, you know you're paying a premium. That's skilled craftsmen. And so these are folks who live in your neighborhood or live in your vicinity, and that money is staying local. So we appreciate that it's invested, the multiplier effect stays within the community. Demolition of historic properties is just yet again contributing to waste that we have no place to put. So again, just looking at even just like the most basic aspects of the advantages of rehabilitation, you don't have a bunch of construction debris to deal with when you put a building back in service. And then again, there are whole new jobs and careers that have come about due to the need to have buildings rehabilitated. Again, skilled craftsmen, someone who had to probably come in and restore their metal windows. The tax credit industry, we'll talk a little bit about that, rehabilitation tax credit, that creates jobs for people. People very often hire consultants to help them with those types of projects. So again, many advantages to rehabilitation of historic properties. I don't think either of my counterparts spoke about this, but I believe that both of their projects took advantage of state and federal tax credits. So again, there is an acknowledgement that rehabilitation of historic properties is probably more expensive per square foot than new construction. And several years ago, the feds undertook an initiative to help incentivize rehabilitation of historic properties, and the federal rehabilitation tax credit was passed. And it is, again, an acknowledgement of the high cost of rehabilitation and encouragement to do this. It's a 20% credit on rehabilitation costs, certified rehabilitation costs. There are no caps for the scale of the project. The project you must spend at least enough to meet your adjusted basis or your depreciated value of your property. And very recently, the tax credit proposal was modified so you can only do 4% per year. That was in the last tax legislation. And there's also a requirement to hold on to property for at least 5 years. And the other thing I'll say about the federal, it is only for income producing properties, so it is not for owner occupied properties. The Arkansas legislature adopted a state rehabilitation tax credit in 2009, or it became active in 2009, and it's a 25% credit on your rehabilitation expenses. And it is very easily transferred, so if your tax liability is not as large as your credit, then you can actually sell it. There's a market for it. It's a commodity, and we see that quite a bit, that they are often passed along. The limit to the number of projects you can do at each property is one project every 2 years. And then it becomes a little different with respect to income producing and owner occupied properties. For income producing properties, there's a $25,000 minimum that you have to spend, so not as much necessarily as the federal. And the project is capped, and it was changed just last year to $1.6 million worth of expenses, so that's a $400,000 credit, state tax credit, that you could get on income producing properties. For owner occupied properties, you also have a $25,000 minimum amount that you have to spend, and the project cap for owner occupied is $100,000 in expenses, or a $25,000 cap. And the state of Arkansas has an overall cap for each fiscal year, which is $4 million. So you are potentially competing with folks who also have projects going on. So once that $4 million credit is hit, you may have to wait for the next fiscal year to tap into your tax credit. The other thing I'm just going to add in here is that there are requirements that you have to follow. There are guidelines that you have to follow to qualify for the tax credits, and that is all operated out of Stacy's shop at the Department of Heritage, the Arkansas Preservation Program. So in addition to having your National Register status taken care of, you have to be National Register listed or within a district. You also would work through the State Preservation Office for both the state tax credits and the federal tax credits. I would say that when the state of Arkansas adopted their tax credits, we saw a major increase in use of all tax credits. If you take a look, and of course the Quapaw Quarter Association focuses on Greater Little Rock, so my numbers are going to reflect what you'll see in Little Rock, but they are of course available throughout the state. But in Little Rock, between 2001 and 2016, we had 60 certified projects. And if you look at those years just before we adopted our state credit, we had 21 projects totaling $22 million in investment. When the state adopted the state rehabilitation tax credit, which you could piggyback with your federal, we saw a great increase. In those 7 years, we saw 49 projects for a total of $81 million, over $81 million in investment. So you're looking at a huge private investment, and I do qualify that because there was one big project in there for the Capitol Hotel. But even if you take out the Capitol Hotel project, which was $21 million, you're still looking at 48 projects for over $60 million, compared to 21 projects for $22 million in the previous years before we had the state tax credit. So we are very, very fortunate in Arkansas to have the opportunity to take advantage of the state tax credit in addition to the federal tax credit. One of the things that I said I was going to plug today when they invited me to talk was an idea that we have floated about making a modification to the state tax credit. As I mentioned, the minimum expense to spend for the tax credit is $25,000 in expenses. And we think that sometimes that's a lot. That's a lot for folks. So we are exploring the possibility, and we've talked with our preservation office about it and legislators about it, of looking at lowering the threshold just for owner-occupied properties to $5,000. So if you're somebody who's in a historic house and you need to do some kind of big project, say maybe replace your roof or replace your HVAC, but you're not quite meeting the $25,000, but you're still spending $5,000, $7,000, $12,000, the tax credits would not be an opportunity for you. So we're going to ask if we're going to pursue a modification to the law that would lower that threshold to $5,000. So it would open it up to other historic property owners. Because frankly, historic preservation sometimes gets a bad rap, and it's considered, it is contributed to gentrification of neighborhoods. So our hope is that this is something that folks who are not necessarily going in just for investment, just for development, but maybe live in a historic property can take advantage of this. And this would again ensure also that they would carry out the work that is consistent with Secretary of Interior standards, so historic standards. So we'll probably be calling on all of you to get in touch with your legislators as we pursue this. And we acknowledge that there are some concerns about it just because the amount of our overall allotment for tax credits is limited, but the way the legislation is written is that owner-occupied properties are always sort of the last in the hierarchy, so we don't anticipate that they would really be competing with large projects like the paint factory or the Mitchell School or the tech park, because those large economic engine projects do get priority, because it is, after all, economic development. And the other thing we'll touch on, and again, I can't speak to the projects around me here that we have seen, but there are certainly other opportunities to layer your tax, the federal tax credits with other incentives. Again, I've already mentioned that you can couple the federal tax credits with the state tax credits, federal if you do have an income producing property, but we know that there are other projects out there, and maybe we can turn it over to these gentlemen if they want to fill in more information. But new market tax credits could be layered on it, on the rehabilitation tax credits, low-income housing tax credits, brownfield revolving loan funds, grants. A lot of the projects that you see on Main Street have taken advantage of the revolving loan funds because they had contamination issues. I mean, even things like the bat issues is a hazmat, and so those get, we have funded those types of projects. So there are other opportunities. Historic preservation restoration grants, also out of the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program at Department of Heritage, and I'll touch on that just very briefly after this. And one of the newest tools that we're learning more about is opportunity zones. And there was the thought that this might be contrary to opportunities with historic preservation, but it appears that this is another opportunity to layer incentives to do rehabilitation of historic properties. And again, that's a new program. We have some zones actually in Little Rock, and they're still working on the rules for that. So some of that is still going to be played out as the rules are developed. And then finally, I just want to touch on opportunities for another incentive, which is the Historic Preservation Restoration Grant Program. This is funded through the real estate transfer tax, and it is an excellent program. There are not many opportunities to get public money for private property, but what we refer to as the HPRG Option 1 grant is one of those. These are properties that are historic, but for some reason, some modification, they're not on the National Register of Historic Places. Maybe they've had a modification, but they could be corrected. So these are grants that a private property owner can pursue and get their property listed on the National Register, and then down the road, do other projects where they could apply for tax credits. The Option 2 grant is only for publicly owned properties, so that might be a city or a county, or a property that's owned by a nonprofit. And these are both matching grant programs, and those are minimum grants of $10,000. And both of the projects have the work must meet the Secretary of Interior standards, and for the Option 2 grants, those require a donation of a preservation easement, since so much public money is going into investment of the property. So that's just a very quick look at incentives, and I'll turn it back over to Stacy for questions.
Thank you very much. And we are at our time, but if there are any quick questions, yes, sir.
Hey, thank you all. And this question is for everyone besides Patricia. Director Hurst, you talked about the importance of stability of place. I would argue that most of this development is creating instability of place for low-income and marginalized communities that already live in those neighborhoods. I think it's ironic to talk about historic preservation, and we're using the word East Village when that neighborhood already had a name. It's called the East End. And so I just wonder, how do we do development that actually, is for people that already live in these neighborhoods, that provides good paying jobs, that doesn't raise property values in a way that forces them to move, that actually gives them opportunity and not further marginalizes the already marginalized.
Thank you. And you're referring mainly to residential real estate, correct?
So like the development in the East End, for instance, that's going to raise property values. The people already in those homes are not going to be able to afford to live there. The restaurant there, Cathead Diner, is $25 a plate on the weekend. And so the people that already live in that neighborhood can't afford to eat there.
I understand.
Yeah.
What is that? I'll let Dan. Dan, did you have any comment?
Yeah, I've got a quick response. That was a note that was a tough question, that entire, the warning system. For us, it is a great question, and I don't know that we have a great answer for it. What we've been doing in our development is engaging with the residents in the East End area that, in particular, Hanger Hill is not quite as organized as East End. And, we are starting to understand the needs of that community and starting to understand and build personal relationships with the residents. There's not a lot of residents left, and, there's been an awful lot of speculation in that area, a lot of tear downs and a lot of gentrification is maybe not the right word, but, the steps towards it, with tear downs and displacement. And, as we come to the close of our project on 6th Street, our next big challenge is working with the neighborhood and the community and try to understand how do we do that and how do we act responsibly for the people that have lived there for generations and not displace them. And, again, every place is different, and I don't think there's one, magic answer, except to say that, we've got to engage the community and work with them alongside what we're doing.
And I do think Patricia's suggestion about lowering the threshold on owner-occupied property speaks to that. It would provide assistance at a lower investment in terms of tax credits. And we do have a number of experts and resources at Historic Preservation that have dealt with this, because we use historic preservation as a tool for revitalization and community building. So if you're interested in having further discussion, we've got professionals here that I know would love to talk to you about that. Any other questions? Anything at all? I want to recognize folks as great resources. I see Rachel Patton here with Preserve Arkansas. If you have any questions about historic preservation opportunities, Greg, Susan are with Main Street. Y'all wave. They do work all across the state of Arkansas, and I like to say that Main Street is that perfect combination of historic preservation, community redevelopment, and community revitalization and economic development. And then Scott Kaufman, who is the head of historic preservation. So those are great resources for you all if you have questions. Thank you all. Yes, sir.
You wanted to research, just like we all show that down, West Woodruff. Where do you go to research?
So I went on there's an Encyclopedia of Arkansas, actually on the state's website. If you just Google, look up either Preservation Arkansas or Preserve Arkansas, you'll find a lot of history, a lot of maps, a lot of documentation on Arkansas at the turn of the century.
And obviously, historically, we've focused on downtown Little Rock, and we have quite a collection of archival material, and now it's at the Butler Center, so it's pretty easily accessible as well. And we also have a great collection of city directories in our office, so if you ever want to come by, quapaw.com, you can take a look at them and find out where your grandparents lived.
Muskie.
Yes, we need help over in the Central Highway. We got the state capitol to the north, Children's Hospital, Central High, the Central High Museum, and I think they're about to get 250,000 guests to come visit. And we have a desert. We have churches, we have liquor stores, but we have no banking, we have no grocery stores. We're in the middle of the city. We need help. Transportation, we're 5 minutes from the airport, 5 minutes from downtown Little Rock, the natural district. I mean, we got the perfect location in real estate, location. How can we get this desert built? I mean, we're in the desert.
Well, I think that Central High is getting better as far as residential development and rehabilitation of historic properties, but what we would like to see from an advocate's perspective is better code enforcement, so buildings aren't so heavily distressed that they have to be torn down, and want to see infill in those neighborhoods, because I think once you have that critical mass of residents, the other services will come, but part of it is just basic enforcement of codes that are already on the books that are just it's not happening. And again, any more demolitions is just another stab in the neighborhood, I feel. And that's what we've got to curtail.
What we need to sell to the investor is still 22,000 people.
Right. Well, I think we need to increase that mass, the residential mass in the neighborhood, and then the services should be following. But again, every time we let a building fall in on itself, we're taking away the tax base, we're taking away the residents, and I think that's, from my perspective, a critical component.
That sounds like a great question for the next mayoral forum, Muskie.
Can I add to that just real briefly? So we've studied Central High recently, the area, and maybe a broader look, not just around Central, but all the neighborhoods, really from Roosevelt to the interstate, and Pine, Cedar, coupling east to downtown. And, using our project as a good example, a parallel, we came into an area and, property owners, residents were very interested and excited about a big creative vision. And we had something that really didn't fit within the rules and guidelines of what was allowed here, Presidential Overlay District and things like that. And, what we kind of find in working with some folks trying to do developments in the Central High neighborhood is that, creative thinking, outside of the box thinking is met with a lot of resistance. I think a lot of education probably needs to happen amongst property owners and residents in the area, so people can see the value of stretching out, doing something a little more creative, rather than following just traditional zoning patterns and construction patterns. That'd be great.
The neighborhood has changed, been revitalized, got new energy, got new young blood. So we need the capital investment in there. And I know, I'm sitting here talking, and I know the one fear that an investor has about Central High neighborhood is the crime. And we can curtail the crime. If you invested, we can take care of the business.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Skip?
Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Muskie, there was legislation passed in the last session, and I don't have the number, but it was championed by Adam Fogelman, who's the county attorney. It was introduced by Warwick Saban, Representative Saban, that expanded cooperatives from the sort of electric cooperative thing into where it would be economic development cooperatives. It's legislation that I think, and I know that Adam Fogelman is looking at it in terms of opportunities in the Main Street area. It might be something that people take a look at. It's been an underreported, underexamined piece of legislation, but it has lots of possibilities for people in neighborhoods. We work with the Center of Community Philanthropy here. It has lots of possibilities to provide economic opportunity in economically challenged neighborhoods. So I'll get you the number of that bill. I don't have it with me, but I thought about it. It's your question. Thank you all for coming. Have a safe trip home, and Denver Peacock, thanks for coordinating.